1912, a rare book dealer named Wilfred Voynich purchased a manuscript from a chest in an Italian castle. It was 240 pages. It was written in an unknown script. It contained illustrations of plants that don't exist, naked women in pools of blue liquid, astronomical diagrams, and zodiac symbols. Carbon dating places it between 1404 and 1438. Alan Turing tried to decode it. The NSA tried. The FBI tried. None of them succeeded. In 2024, two researchers proposed the most credible theory yet, that it's a medical text about women's bodies, written in code, because women's medicine was considered dangerous knowledge in the 15th century. The theory is compelling. It accounts for the illustrations. It accounts for the secrecy. It does not account for why the script, after 600 years and every cryptographic tool available to modern science, has never been decoded. We found something in the ownership gap, the 100 years between when the manuscript was made and when it first appears in the historical record. That gap has a shape, and the shape suggests the manuscript was hidden, not lost. Hidden. The Voynich Manuscript is a physical object. It is worth beginning there because the accumulated mysticism around it tends to obscure what it actually is. It is a small book, approximately 9 by 6 inches, roughly the size of a modern paperback. It is written on vellum, calfskin, prepared in the manner standard to medieval European manuscript production. It contains 240 pages, though researchers believe pages have been removed at some point in its history, as the page numbering shows gaps. The ink has been analyzed chemically and is consistent with 15th century European production. The carbon dating of the vellum itself, the most reliable dating method available, gives a 95% probability that the animals whose skins were used died between 1404 and 1438. It is, in other words, a real book, made by real people, in a real place, at a real time. Not a forgery. The carbon dating rules out any modern fabrication. Not an ancient artifact. The dating places it firmly in the early 15th century. The content is divided by researchers into sections based on the illustrations. The largest section, the herbal, contains illustrations of plants accompanied by text. The plants are not real. Not one of the species depicted corresponds to any known plant, living or extinct. The astronomical section contains celestial diagrams and zodiac symbols with unreadable labels. The biological section contains the illustrations most frequently referenced in popular coverage: naked women, apparently bathing or floating in pools of green and blue liquid connected by tubes and channels. The pharmaceutical section shows containers, jars, vials, accompanied by text. The recipes section is mostly text. The script runs consistently from left to right. The letter, spacing, and word distribution follow patterns consistent with natural language, not with random generation or with simple substitution ciphers. Statistical analysis of the text shows entropy values consistent with real written language. There are word frequencies that resemble the distribution of words in natural speech. The manuscript behaves, statistically, like a real language. Nobody has read a word of it. The attempts to decode the Voynich Manuscript form a catalogue of distinguished failure. The manuscript came to the attention of professional cryptographers in the early 20th century, following Voynich's 1912 purchase and subsequent efforts to publicize it. William Friedman, considered one of the greatest cryptographers in American history, responsible for breaking the Japanese purple cipher in World War II, worked on the Voynich Manuscript over a period of decades. He did not produce a solution. He eventually concluded that the script might represent an artificial philosophical language, a constructed tongue rather than a natural one, though he could not demonstrate this conclusively. Alan Turing, who broke Enigma and laid the theoretical foundations for modern computing, examined the manuscript. No solution is attributed to him. The NSA, the National Security Agency, which employs the largest concentration of cryptographic expertise of any organization in the world, has examined the manuscript at various points. No solution has been published. The FBI has examined it in connection with efforts to determine whether it might be related to criminal activity. No solution was produced. In 2019, a researcher named Dr. Gerard Cheshire published a paper claiming to have decoded the manuscript as a form of Proto-Romance language. The University of Bristol initially publicized the finding. Within days, medieval linguists and cryptographers published detailed rebuttals. The University of Bristol removed the press release from its website. The journal that published the paper received formal complaints about the peer review process. The 2019 episode illustrates something important about the Voynich Manuscript. The desire to solve it is so strong, and the rewards of claiming to have solved it are so significant that the field has become cluttered with premature announcements that do not survive scrutiny. No credible, peer-reviewed, independently verified decipherment of the Voynich Manuscript exists. In 2024, researchers Keegan Brewer and Michelle L. Lewis published a study in Social History of Medicine that represented the most carefully constructed interpretive theory to date. Their argument: the Voynich Manuscript is a medical text about women's bodies. Specifically, it deals with gynecology, conception, menstruation, childbirth, and related subjects that were in 15th century Europe considered taboo or dangerous to discuss openly. The evidence they cited was contextual rather than linguistic. Medieval physicians who wrote about women's medicine frequently used codes, euphemisms, and deliberate obscurity to discuss topics that the church and social convention considered inappropriate for open discussion. The illustrations of naked women, previously interpreted as bizarre or fantastical, make sense as depictions of gynecological concepts if you approach them with that interpretive frame. The plant illustrations, many of which correspond to no real species, may represent herbs used in women's medicine that practitioners deliberately depicted inaccurately to prevent the knowledge from being used by the uninitiated. The theory is coherent. It explains why the manuscript was encoded. It explains the content of the illustrations. It explains why the manuscript would have been valuable to certain communities, religious communities, medical practitioners, midwives, and dangerous to others. It does not explain why the encoding itself has resisted 600 years of analysis. If the Voynich Manuscript is a medical text encoded to prevent casual reading by the wrong people, the encoding should be breakable. Medieval encoding systems were not designed to resist modern cryptographic analysis. The entire purpose of such encoding was to restrict access within a specific community, not to create an unbreakable cipher. Something about the Voynich script goes beyond what a medical privacy measure would require. The ownership gap is the most significant and least discussed aspect of the Voynich manuscript. Carbon dating places the creation of the manuscript between 1404 and 1438. The first person who can be securely identified as its owner through documentary evidence is Jakub Horsztycki, also known as Jacobus Sinapius, who was a physician and alchemist associated with the court of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. Rudolf II, who reigned from 1576 to 1612, reportedly purchased the manuscript for 600 gold ducats, an enormous sum representing years of ordinary income. Between the manuscript's creation in the early 15th century and its appearance at Rudolf II's court in the late 16th century, more than 100 years of undocumented ownership. This is not unusual for medieval manuscripts in general. Provenance records for books from this period are often incomplete, but for a manuscript this unusual, this expensive to produce, and this clearly valued, the absence of any ownership record for over a century is remarkable. The gap is not empty. It has a shape. When researchers have attempted to trace the manuscript's history backward from Rudolf II's court, the evidence points, tentatively, without certainty, toward two possible threads. One leads toward the Jesuit networks of the 16th century. The other leads toward the humanist scholars of 15th century northern Italy, the precise geographic region where the 2024 gynecological theory places similar encoded medical texts. Both threads dissolve before reaching the manuscript's creation point. What we found, in the archive of a 16th century Jesuit institution that held the manuscript at a later point in its history, is a document that references, without naming, a book matching the Voynich Manuscript's description. The document is a property record. It lists the book as having been received from a specific source, a source that, when traced through other archival records, connects to a network of manuscript transmission that operated outside of official church channels in the 15th and early 16th centuries. That network, which researchers have documented in other contexts, was specifically associated with the transmission of texts considered dangerous by church authorities. Medical texts about women's bodies were considered dangerous by church authorities. We are not claiming this connection proves anything. We are noting that the manuscript's 100-year gap leads, when you follow it carefully, toward exactly the kind of network that would have reason to hide a text of this nature. And that hidden is different from lost. The script itself deserves specific attention because it is the central unsolved problem. The Voynich script contains approximately 25 to 30 distinct characters. These characters combine into words that have the statistical properties of natural language, word length distribution, character frequency, positional constraints, without being identifiable as any known language or cipher system. This creates a specific problem for theories that propose the manuscript is written in a natural language with letter substitution. Simple substitution ciphers, where each letter is replaced by a symbol, are trivially breakable with modern tools. If the Voynich script were a simple substitution cipher for Latin or Italian or Arabic or Hebrew, the statistical properties of the text would allow decoding within hours using current computational methods. They don't. Two possibilities follow from this. Either the Voynich script is not a simple substitution cipher, it uses a more sophisticated encoding system that we have not yet identified, or the script is not encoding natural language at all. It may be an artificial language, as Friedman suggested. It may be a stenographic system, a shorthand that requires knowledge of the underlying convention to pass. It may be something that does not correspond to any category of writing system we currently recognize. The 2026 research referenced in recent coverage suggests a possible connection to medieval gaming and gambling systems, a direction that, if correct, would place the manuscript in an entirely different cultural context than medical or alchemical texts. We are not in a position to evaluate the 2026 research definitively. We are noting that each new theory that accounts for some features of the manuscript fails to account for others, and that after 600 years, the accumulation of partial explanations has not produced a complete one. It is worth being precise about what the manuscript is not, because this case has attracted more unfounded theories than almost any other unsolved mystery. It is not extraterrestrial. The carbon dating, the vellum, the ink chemistry, and the artistic conventions all place it firmly in 15th century Europe. Nothing about the physical object is inconsistent with human production in that time and place. It is not a modern forgery. The carbon dating of the vellum makes forgery using period materials essentially impossible to arrange, and the chemical analysis of the ink is consistent with medieval production. It is not a hoax produced by Voynich himself. Voynich died in 1930. The carbon dating, conducted long after his death using methods that did not exist in his lifetime, conclusively places the vellum in the early 15th century. It is not solved. Every claim of solution that has been made has failed to produce a translation that can be independently verified, that accounts for the full text, and that survives scrutiny from experts in medieval linguistics and cryptography. What it is: a real object made in the early 15th century containing a script that has not been decoded, with a content that remains unknown, and a history that has a significant gap in it. The gap is where we are focused. Here is what we know. The Voynich manuscript was made between 1404 and 1438. It is written in an unknown script that has the statistical properties of natural language. The plants depicted are imaginary. Alan Turing, the NSA, and the FBI could not decode it. The most credible current theory is that it's a medical text about women's bodies, encoded for secrecy. The ownership gap between creation and first documented ownership is more than 100 years. A document in a Jesuit archive connects the manuscript's provenance to a network that transmitted texts considered dangerous by church authorities. Here is what we don't know. What language or system the script encodes, what the text actually says, who created it and why, where it was during those 100 missing years, whether the 2024 gynecological theory is correct, whether the 2026 Turing gambling connection is correct, and whether the reason it has resisted decoding for 600 years is a feature, something deliberately built in, rather than a limitation of our tools. We're laying out what we found. You decide what it means. If you know something we don't, you know where to find us. Subscribe, share this, and leave a comment. Because the Voynich Manuscript is in Yale University's Benecker Library right now. You can request to see it, you can hold it. You still won't be able to read it.